the word information is being corrupted in science. For us, for me, for you, information is the meaning of a symbol. The symbol is a carrier of meaning. And the meaning is not a property of the brain or the physical brain. The meaning is a property of the field. It's something that we have within. In fact, we had to have is what is carried by qualia, by an experience, by an inner experience. So meaning is the foundational aspect, is the ultimate ontology of reality, because meaning is what one is seeking to know itself. Meaning is the essence of its own self-knowing. The essence of its own self-knowing is who am I? Is the meaning of who I am. That's what meaning is. And we seek the same. And in fact, one knows itself through our own knowing ourselves. So there is a lot to this theory, as you can see, but it all makes sense, and it all connects with the spiritual traditions as well as connect with what physics has been saying. And so this is truly a joining of spirituality and science.
So is it fair to say then that meaning is a foundational aspect of reality? It's built into the fabric of existence, and we use information and classical symbols as a way to sort of, for agents within this reality to sort of share that meaning with each other.
Absolutely. And if you share then that information, if you share that information with love, you achieve the same meaning, you resonate.
Okay, I'm joined here with Dr. Federico Faggin. Federico, your invention of the microprocessor laid the foundation for the digital age. This made computers, the internet, and smartphones possible. It's essentially reshaped human life. And now you seem to be on a bit of a mission to change our understanding of consciousness. So I was curious to ask, why is this so important? Why have you dedicated this part of your life to doing this?
Well, because the advent of AI is really changing the entire society right now, and I kind of saw it coming. I was working in artificial intelligence back in the late 80s, starting from 86 on, until I switched to different products and ideas simply because it was too early. But at that time, I also had an extraordinary experience of consciousness that let me understand that consciousness was fundamental, and it could not be a product of any physical matter in space and time. It had to be something else. But at that time, I was a science. I believe in scientism. In other words, the way most scientists today think that reality is only what exists in space and time. And so I thought that a computer could be conscious eventually, because anything, our body is in space and time, so computers are in space and time. So if we are conscious, they can be conscious. But after that experience, it was very clear that was not so easy and possibly not possible. And so it took a while to understand that consciousness must be fundamental and must have a completely different origin than classical matter, like computers. And then AI was really coming up. And so I decided to go public, in a sense, to really express the research that I had done for, since 1990, actually before 1988, when I asked myself the first time the question of what is consciousness, is consciousness a product of the brain or not? Can I make a conscious computer? Those questions I asked myself at that time. And so I decided to write my autobiography, and also a chapter in that book that was published in Italy in 2019, talking about the beginning of a theory. And now I have a full-blown theory of consciousness and free will that explains that consciousness and free will cannot be produced either by a quantum classical system like our body, and even less by a classical computer like the ones that host artificial intelligence. And so it's fundamental that we understand that we are much more than computers. In a day when we are told that we are machines, just like computers, in fact, not so good, because computers will overcome our intelligence pretty soon if they haven't done it already. So I, now I'm really on a tour, in a sense, to explain my theory, because I believe that only if we change the idea of who we are can we really handle properly, ethically, this technology, which is extremely disruptive, and only if we use it ethically can be a benefit for humankind.
Thank you for sharing that. And for anybody that's new to your work, could you just give us the sort of big picture overview of your theory of consciousness?
Yes, my theory recognizes that consciousness must be a fundamental property of quantum fields. Quantum fields like the quantum field of electrons, the quantum field of protons, and so on. So those quantum fields, of course, within physics, they don't have consciousness, nor do they have free will. In this theory, they have consciousness and free will, and they want to know themselves. So I start with a postulate, and the postulate is that one, the totality of what exists, is dynamic, is holistic, and wants to know itself. So dynamic and holistic describes what quantum physics is saying, that the universe continuously changes, never the same, instant after instant. Holistic means that the universe is not made of parts. Everything is interconnected. The discovery of quantum entanglement has shown without any doubt that everything is interconnected. There are no parts. What we consider as particle, for example, electrons, are actually states of a field, just like the waves of the sea are states of the sea. They are part of the sea. They cannot be separated from the sea. The same way electrons, they're not objects that can be separated from their field. They're states of the field. They come and they go. And so this idea, then, it makes a lot of sense, because if we now say that one wants to know itself, then we can explain why quantum fields in quantum physics have the crazy properties that physicists have found. That the property of the quantum state of a field, for example, are not properties of a computer, because the quantum state of a field cannot be reproduced. There is the no cloning theorem. It says that no quantum state can be known. The maximum that you can know of a quantum state is 1 bit per quantum bit that describes the state. Quantum bits are very sophisticated structures. You can imagine them as every point on the surface of a sphere could be a state of a quantum. The state of a quantum bit, and quantum bits are entangled. They have states in common, which are not. Those are not properties of classical bits. Each classical bit is independent from all the others, nothing in common with any other. But in the quantum fields, quantum bits have properties that are in common. In some cases, they are so tied that if one quantum bit is in this direction, the other one must be in the opposite direction. And that property maintains even if the two states are far apart, way beyond the reach of light, because these states are instantaneously manifested. When you measure one, the other one instantly takes the other state. So these properties are incomprehensible. Why are they there? Well, those properties are exactly the same properties that we have when we consider our own inner experience. My inner experience is private, can only be known by me, But me is not the body in this case. Me is the field. Because if I were the body, my state, like the state of a computer, can be copied, right? But we are not the body. We are a field controlling the body in this new theory. So, and it is the field that we are that has these crazy properties. Also, what I can say about what I feel is only a small part of what I feel. The same thing that happens in a quantum field. The other thing that happens in a quantum field is when you make a measurement of an electron, for example, the quantum theory only can tell you the probability of where you could measure an electron if you make an experiment. But when we make a measurement, we find the electron in a certain place. How do we go from this probability distribution to actually the actual measurement? Quantum physics says there is the collapse of the wave function. In other words, there is a random event that it doesn't exist in any theory, but we have to assume that there is because we find this. So we say, okay, there is a random event. We find the electron here. And if we repeat the experiments many times, done the same way, we find that the probability of finding electrons in different places is actually correctly predicted by quantum physics, but not the state that manifests. So the probabilities are deterministic, but not what we measure. So the determinism is in the probabilities. But the deterministic probability doesn't mean that I know what is going to happen. Just like if I throw a coin, the probability tells me there is 50. If the coin is fair, there is 50% chance that it comes up with heads or with tails, right? But I cannot tell which way it comes up. In quantum physics, though, this is much more subtle because in classical physics, if you knew everything that there is to know about the air, the table, the coin, and all the way, the force with which you throw the coin out, you can actually predict precisely if you have heads or tail. In other words, the state that will manifest is deterministic, and knowing all the information, you could tell whether it will show up heads or tail. Not so in quantum physics. In quantum physics, the state that will manifest cannot be known, is determined when you make the measurement. But the measurement is actually an interaction between two fields, the fields of the particle that you're measuring and the field of the instrument that interacts with this other field. And only in the interaction the state is determined. And the state is determined by what? By the collapse of the wave function. In this theory, we say, no, it's the free will of the field that you are measuring that actually determines its own state. So now we can basically eliminate the need of a collapse of the wave function, and it can be explained with a free will decision of the field. And the fields are no longer observer-observed, because that's possible only in classical physics. In quantum physics, every field is an observer, an observed, and an agent, because the field, for example, when I measure a quantum bit, the field will have a certain direction of the magnetic field that is needed to measure the qubit, and it imposes that direction to the qubit that I'm trying to measure. So it changes its state. So it's an agent, and it forces the agent, and it is, so by changing the agent then responds by changing its own result and changing the observer. And so both behaves, the measurement becomes a symmetric operation where each observer and observer are actually interacting and exchanging information, which, of course, in this theory, this information is really only the outer aspect of the meaning that they want to communicate with each other. In other words, the inner state, the state that cannot be known, that state is the meaning. And that meaning is what is actually exchanged through symbols, which are they are fields or states of fields in space and time, which are really the symbolic aspect of reality, but the semantic aspect of reality is the interiority of the field where there is consciousness and free will. Long story, but this actually can explain very clearly that if you start with quantum fields that have consciousness and free will and interact with each other symmetrically, like I explained, which is what quantum physics is saying. The quantum physics does not say that the fields are conscious and free will, but other than that, if you accept that, then you explain why quantum fields must have those properties if you start with the existence of consciousness and free will at the outset as a postulate, since consciousness cannot be explained in any way. If you have matter that has no consciousness, the same way happens with free will. How can you explain free will if you have matter without free will? You cannot explain it. You have to say it's random. And so now we say randomness when we should say free will. And now the moment that you say free will, all of a sudden the universe has meaning and purpose, because free will is connected with meaning and purpose with us. So you can see that just by starting with this postulate where one wants to know itself, and to want to know itself means the wanting is what becomes the free will of the fields, which are emanations of one, the totality of what exists, the unified field. And to know itself, it must be conscious, because conscious will allow the field one to know itself, and also the fields to know themselves. And they do, and they can, and since they cannot know their own state, they cannot copy their own state, they have to use symbols to communicate and to know themselves. Because when one knows itself, it creates a part whole of itself. It doesn't create, it's holistic, so it cannot know itself, just a tiny bit of itself. It must know the totality of itself in the direction in which it knows itself. And the direction in which it knows itself is like a frame of reference in which one is known itself, which becomes the identity of the field.
Wow, there's so much there. Since discovering your work, something I've been thinking a lot about is the idea that free will is a property of the field and not of the body. Can you maybe just expand on the significance of this for our individual human lives, do you think?
Yeah, but it means that we are directing our own self-knowing with free will. And of course, consciousness, the direction, in some way, the direction is determined by the particular identity that we have, which is the direction in which one has known itself originally, that created us. So when one knows itself with that in that direction, it creates a field that is a part whole of itself. So because it must bring into existence what it didn't know before. So knowing and existing are two aspects of the same thing. So to know is to bring into existence from where? From the potential existence, which in physics would be the quantum vacuum. The quantum vacuum is a plenum of energy, is something that connects everything. It's like a bath that connects everything. Quantum physics has described it when you take all matter out, there is vacuum, but this quantum vacuum has a density of energy which is unbelievable. Is incalculable. It's near infinite. And so, you stop at a certain point and say, well, we go up to this frequency and then we stop, which the frequency is determined by the Planck time. But let's not get into the details. But basically, the density of energy of the quantum vacuum is enormous. So the quantum vacuum is basically what the things, the entity out of which everything emerges. And so I call the quantum vacuum the potentiality of one. One, before, if there has ever been a beginning, because we don't know if there was a beginning or not, but if there was ever a beginning, the first time that one knew itself, it brought into existence the first field that knew itself. Perhaps that was the electromagnetic field, because light was the fundamental expression, is the fundamental expression of but light not necessarily in the form in which then it became free later in the evolution of the universe, but the photons were the first states of one. But let's not get there, because otherwise we need a day, not an hour. But the point is that if we consider this, we have immediately a sense that one is absolutely the origin of everything, and what it creates is what it knows. And what knows must be conscious, must be a part whole of itself, meaning must contain all its potentiality, and must want to know itself. But to know itself now, since it's a part whole, it must know the others like itself. There we go. Now we have a reality, a universe where cooperation is the word, not competition. Life starts with one creating parts whole of itself. Look also that our body is made of parts whole. Every cell of my body has the genome of the egg that created the entire organism. Every part has the potential knowledge of the entire organism. We are built in image of one. Even the body that I claim is not conscious. The consciousness of the body is really the consciousness of the field, that little portion of the consciousness of the field that has identified with the body, believes to be the body, thinks to be in the body, but is in fact in this space. But this space and time, the way we perceive it, is our construction, is the construction of what the body senses, the body's brain has elaborated, created information, then the quantum field that we are experiences as this reality. And since we have the same sensory system, typically the same brain, the same way of processing, the same culture, we see reality the same way. And we think that this physical reality is the real reality, when in fact is in a great measure a construction done by the body, but experience in the field that we are, in the conscious field that we are.
An analogy that you used that I found really helpful was this idea of someone playing a video game. And in the analogy, we sort of mistakenly think that we are the character within the game, within the screen, when in reality we are that, but we are also the person outside of the screen holding the controller. Could you maybe just expand on this analogy and how this connects with free will?
Yeah, basically, basically, I have an analogy which I have not used much, but is very rich. But imagine that you're playing a game, okay, with a computer. So then the screen of the computer is where all the reality that you're observing occurs. So there is an avatar there, and if you, in fact, if you have a mask, one of those, or headset, whatever you want to call it, where you have the information coming from the computer, that information shows you the reality. Then if you have also earbuds, then you can also hear. So you have at least two sensory modality that you can interact with this virtual reality. When you move around, you see the all construction. You see space, time. You see objects. Where are those objects coming from? Are they coming from the reality? No, they are generated by a computer. And you see space, objects that move, and you interact with the body in that thing, right? If this well done, you may indeed believe for some moments, if you engross yourself with the game, that you are the avatar that is actually acting in that virtual reality. Well, the actual reality is now far different from this. Except that we actually see with our sensory systems, we see what's here, but what's here is we only look through a very narrow window. For example, we only see a sliver, one octave of, many, 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 many octaves of light. Octave, meaning the frequency band of light, which goes from roughly 0.4 to 0.8 micron of wavelength. Okay, so you go from 0.4 to 0.8, and from 0.8 to 1.6, you go, in the infrared, and on it goes, and you keep on going. And so, if I had cell phone instead of eyes, I would actually listen into the 10,000 conversations that are going on right now in this space where I don't see anything. But all these conversations are here, right? So you can see how we isolate a very narrow band of what's going on, and we call that reality. Or we use instruments, and we call reality what the instrument sees. But even the instrument is in space and time. But we are not. The field is not in this reality, is outside of the computer. The computer with the screen, that's the reality. Now, we don't even see the computer. When we put this stuff, we think that reality is what is the screen where the output of the computer goes. But there is a computer. That computer, in this new idea, the reality that we see, the screen, is what I call the body. The computer is actually the mind. But the mind is a quantum computer. It's not a classical computer like in the games that we play right now. And we are outside of the quantum computers, and that spirit, the consciousness, and so on, is outside of that. So there are three aspects which are integrated, inseparable, that are part of the fundamental reality that of which, for the moment, scientism recognizes only one, which is the body. The body, because we also consider, quantum physics by the scientism is considered simply a mathematical theories that allows us to make predictions about what we can measure in space and time, because reality is only what exists in space and time. That is what scientism is saying today. There is no reality associated with quantum theory. But what I'm saying, the deeper reality is in fact it goes beyond quantum. The quantum theory is really only the aspect of mind. And there is the aspect of body. But the aspect of spirit is completely unknown. That's new physics on top of it, but also is what we really are. We are in that deeper reality. So, for example, in the overlap between quantum theory, the mind, and the spirit, which is consciousness, free will, the meaning of information, there in that overlap, we have qualia, sensations and feelings. Sensations and feelings are produced at the interface between mind and spirit, between the computer, quantum computer, and the spiritual aspect that we are, the fields. Within the field, there is the meaning, there is the experience, but also the meaning of the experience. And the meaning of the experience is the meaning of the information that is perceived by the body that looks at the physical reality, looks at the screen, looks at the screen, is inside the screen, looks at the screens, and believe that that is reality, when in fact is largely a construction of this whole thing.
I've heard you say that the body can be thought of almost as a bridge which allows us to connect with a deeper reality. And
Yeah.
you also speak about this idea of a satiety. Can you maybe tell us what a satiety is and how this links in here as well?
Yeah, well, a satiety is simply the name to call a quantum field that has consciousness and free will. In this theory, a satiety is a quantum field with free will and consciousness. That's it. However, in this theory, quantum fields can interact with each other. When they interact with each other and they and exchanging information with each other, and they can bring into resonance their interiority. And by the way, important here is that love is the one that allows this, brings this resonance of the two fields and communicate into resonance, which means they have the same meaning. So through outer communication and love, which is an inner property of the fields, they can arrive to a joint state that where the maximum joint understanding is being reached. And when they reach that state, then a new entity appears, which is a field of fields, just like the field of the atom of hydrogens. When the field of electrons, the field of protons interacting with each other to know each other, to know each other, to see what they have in common, eventually find all that they have in common. What do? They create a new field, which is the field of the atoms of hydrogen, which is completely different properties than the sum of the properties of the electron and the proton. Is a quantum. That's why the atom of hydrogen behaves, if you send the atom of hydrogen through a double slit, it behaves just like a particle. It behaves just like a wave. It is not an object, even that one, and so on.
Sorry, what implications does this have for our understanding of death and what comes after?
Well, in this theory, clearly, once we are created as a field, we have, we do not die. We simply, we can embody into a physical body in a virtual reality, so to speak, and have an experience in the virtual reality, which is, however, here I do make a very important point, because the virtual reality of a computer is truly a virtual reality because a classical bit does not exist. Is our own mind as imposed on physical reality, classical physical reality that behaves deterministically, has imposed the distinction of what is zero and what is one. And as long as that physical reality behaves deterministically, meaning within certain environmental conditions and so on, then the computer will do exactly what we told them to do. But the computer is not conscious, doesn't know what it's doing, and that the structure, the informational structure that we impose on the computer is our consciousness that imposed on the computer. So that structure exists only to the extent that we interpret it with our consciousness and we give it truth, but it is, it will disappear the moment that you raise the temperature. You go to 100 degrees C, the computer doesn't work anymore. It behaves in a different way, and who knows, and that's it, gone. All that reality that you had before is gone. The reality in space and time is made by fields that interact with particles, atoms and so on, which are states of the field. Those are states of the field that are inseparable from the field. So this reality that we call physical reality is connected with the mental reality of the fields and with the spiritual reality of the fields. You see? So that it cannot be separated, but it is still highly virtual, because we use, the body uses that reality by looking at the sliver of it and creating a virtual reality, almost virtual reality, which connects us and allows us to know ourselves. But the particles, atoms, molecules, physical structure, and so on are actually symbolic structures that we use to communicate meaning with each other. And the meaning is the meaning of information, which doesn't exist in science. Science speaks of information without meaning. For science, information is simply the absence or presence of a symbol. And the symbol is something that, is defined whatever you want to define it. It's basically an event in space and time. That's it. But there is no meaning within science, and that is a major problem. The word information is being corrupted in science by the way that information is for us. For me, for you, information is the meaning of a symbol. The meaning of a symbol is information, not the symbol. The symbol is a carrier of meaning, and the meaning is not a property of the brain or the physical brain. The meaning is a property of the field. It's something that we have within. In fact, we had to have is what is carried by qualia, by an experience, by an inner experience. So meaning is the foundational aspect, is the ultimate ontology of reality, because meaning is what one is seeking to know itself. Meaning is the essence of its own self-knowing. The essence of its own self-knowing is, who am I? Is the meaning of who I am. That's what meaning is. And we seek the same. And in fact, one knows itself through our own knowing ourselves. So it's a, there is a lot to this theory, as you can see, but it all makes sense, and it all connects with the spiritual traditions as well as connect with what physics has been saying. And so this is truly a joining of spirituality and science, especially physics.
So, is it fair to say then that meaning is a foundational aspect of reality? It's built into the fabric of existence, and we use information and classical symbols as a way to sort of, for agents within this reality to sort of share that meaning with each other
That's
and
correct.
connect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you share then that that information, if you share that information with love, you achieve the same meaning, the same, you resonate. But the resonance is not a physical resonance, it's a resonance of the inner of the field, which is what meaning, that the bring where meaning is. So if our interiority of the field resonates, that portion that resonates, it has exactly the same meaning. So we want, we know ourselves if we communicate using symbols, which are shareable symbols. They are classical symbols. That's what the body can only see, is classical symbols. We don't see particles with our sensory systems. So we can do that, but what we want is to know ourselves and to know the other as ourselves through this process. But the knowing is not in the body. The knowing is in the field. The body, comes and goes. So we by being the field, when the body dies, we continue to exist. So, but this is not a a religious dogma. This is actually, it comes out naturally from this theory. All you have to start with one postulate that one wants to know itself. It's dynamic, holistic, is the totality of what exists. Dynamic, holistic, it wants to know itself. And then we, in turn, want to know ourselves. Why do I say that? Because ultimately, that's the deepest thing that we want to do when we are on this earth, is to know who we are. Science is about knowing, but knowing in a very certain way, to try to also, find utility in our knowledge and, create technologies, whatever. So there is more to it than just the knowing itself. Pure science is about true knowing ourselves in the world. But science is focused only on the outside world, where we know that we have an inner world. And so by focusing only on the outside world and pretending that the inner world doesn't exist, we have eliminated our humanity. We have eliminated what matters, because what matters is within ourselves, in those fields, not the body, not the stuff that the bodies and our instruments observe.
Yeah. It makes me think that if we lose sight of that truth, as AI gets better and better, we could be remade in the image of the machine, and that could just be so catastrophic for us collectively. Something I've heard you speak about, Federico, is the idea that responsibility might be a prerequisite for knowing oneself and for awakening. Can you maybe just share your thoughts on this and why this is so important?
Yeah, I think that I will, in this case, since you come right at as in the context of knowing ourselves, there are two things. One is honesty. In other words, for example, suppose I suffer. Okay, suppose I suffer. If I try to hide to myself that I suffer, or to move it away from my from existence, I'm dishonest with myself. I'm not acknowledging what's happening within myself. So that honesty of acknowledging what's happening, paying attention to everything that is happening within me, that is the first prerequisite. the second prerequisite is then to recognize that there's suffering that I have acknowledged that exists, where before I was trying to avoid it or pretend that it wasn't there. Then I say, because I have free will, I can, I'm to a large extent, I can, to a smaller or larger extent, depending on how I am, I'm directing my own experience. I make choices that direct my own experience. Even more, I make, if I don't make a choice when I should have made a choice. In other words, I allow the body to act in automatic when I should have intervened and changed the automatic behavior of the body. I will bring into myself the issues that I'm now, feeling, the suffering that I'm feeling, for example. So responsibility then is to acknowledge that everything that happens to me, I had a hand in it. Maybe not completely, but a big hand I had. So I take responsibility from also taking care of that suffering that I have acknowledged. So now, once I have done that, now I'm in a completely different environment where I can actually ask for help. If you ask for help without having done these clearly two steps, most likely nothing happens, because the help is a superficial thing. But once you say, no, I created that, I want to change that, then the universe, who we are, the vaster part that we are, helps us. That's how, for example, what happened to me, I was suffering but pretending not to suffer. Then I acknowledged finally that I was suffering. And then I realized, because I had realized for other reasons, that I'm responsible for everything that happens to me. And that happened because I was a CEO. When you're a CEO of the company and something goes wrong, you cannot blame somebody else. You are, c'est moi. And so once you have accepted that, then I say, well, now I want to fix it. If I cause that to myself, then I can fix it. Is that also, in so do you take your own power back, because by not acknowledging and by blaming others, you have actually, you're not even using your power. You are dissipating it. You're pretending that, basically you're unconscious of what's going on. So it was because of those two conditions that I was able to have this experience. It was that, it's not even, is the wrong way of saying I was able. I was given, I was offered, I was graced with this experience, but I wanted it. I had made those two steps that cost me 50 years almost of my life, in terms of experience and thinking and, suffering and doing whatever we all do to grow.
When I think about your story, there's sort of almost like a prodigal son pattern to it. Like you went out into the world and you achieved every single thing that you thought would make you happy, and at the end of that, you found an emptiness, and then you came back home and you realized that consciousness was fundamental and maybe the most important thing. Something I was curious to ask you is, how is your inner experience of life different since you've cultivated and developed this understanding within yourself of what reality really is, compared to when you had achieved, you changed the world essentially. You'd achieved everything that somebody could possibly hope to achieve in a lifetime, and it didn't make you happy. And so few people are in that position. So I think it's worth asking you what the difference is like before and after this realization.
Well, night and day, but it was not immediate. It took a long time to actually achieve this, because then that experience gave me, first of all, changed me the sense of who I am, where before I felt myself as separate from the world, separate from others, from objects, from the world. In that experience, I was a part whole of one. I mean, my theory actually was an attempt to explain exactly what happened to me, and now my theory explains that. But it explains also what we all are, because we all have the same abilities and the same capability. So by experiencing myself as love that was coming out of me and then was feeling everything, and my consciousness was in this love that was coming out of me and going everywhere and being everywhere, and was white scintillating light. I mean, I was both the observer and the observed. Exactly what I'm talking about, the fields. The fields are observer, observe, and agent. So, and so, but that experience also not only changed me, completely, just upside down the idea that I had of who I am, but also the experience of that love was also joy and peace. I never felt peace before in my life. I was, I was never where I was. I was always in my mind. I had to be in the meeting that was an hour from now. And I had thinking about the plan that we had, thinking about the product that was, that was late, and whatever. My mind was never where I was. Now I'm here with you, and that's fine. I mean, that's all. I'm here with you. I'm at peace with myself. I'm doing what I came here to do. And that gives me joy. It gives me a sense of fulfillment. I'm here to do what I came here to do. But it took about 35 years to get to, actually, about 20 years to get to a very solid position. But at 20 years of work, at 30-40% of my time, while I was still running two companies, as a matter of fact, during that period. So it was a very intense period of personal work, going through, you know, all kinds of traumas that I had in my childhood and so on. Nothing catastrophic or major, but still necessary to little by little relieve the pressure points in my psychology and in my life, and regain the serenity in my mind and the sense of who I am. So, after that, I decided that that's what I want to do. So I got out of everything, and I decided to dedicate myself to the union between science and spirituality, because after those 20 years of work, it was very clear that consciousness and free will had to be part and parcel of a deeper reality that could not be part of the body. It had to be quantum, but I didn't know how. So it took a while to find the connection. And that connection was actually also helped by the work that I did with a famous Italian physicist, Giacomo Mauro Tariano, who is the one that was able to show that quantum information, if you start with quantum information, you can derive from quantum information directly the quantum physics. So quantum physics relates completely as a theory to quantum information. But then I asked to Dariano, I said, but Mauro, what about the meaning of information? Where is the meaning of information? He said, what is the meaning? I said, well, the meaning of information is what matters to us. I said, oh, well, it took me a while, but eventually he got it. And together we found that the connection was these two theorems of quantum physics that actually allow you to start to explain quantum physics if we start from consciousness and free will, which is what I started tonight. So talking about, so anyway, so this is the process. And now I consider myself extremely, extremely, I mean, as happy as I can be, but also the happiness that what I call happiness now is not the happiness that I was seeking. It was a childish things when I was thinking that when I had achieved everything, I would be happy. And I was, I never really spent a lot of time to understand what I meant with that. But I knew that I was not happy, and that was the problem. And I had to understand it. So now I'm at peace with myself. I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I have a lot of energy. I'm 84, just turned 84, and I give a talk a day in in different parts of Italy and abroad. So I mean, it's because I think this is fundamental. It's essential that we understand that we are not machines. scientism is saying that we are machines. So when the machine breaks, we are no longer, we don't exist anymore. How bad can it be? I mean, at least religions gave us a hope. They still would tell us that, we are sinners and all of that or whatever. But at least there was a hope. But scientism doesn't even give us a hope. The only hope is that we can download our consciousness into the computer and live forever, which is a crazy hope because it's impossible. And people don't even know what consciousness is. How can you download something that you don't even know what it is?
I've heard you say that whenever you held the worldview of being a materialist for a long time, and there was a payoff to that, that the sense that nothing matters. Well, then if nothing matters, I can just go after what I want in this lifetime and enjoy it and all the rest. But there are consequences here. And something else I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned there, you sort of hinted at it, you said something like, this is what I came here to do, or I have a job to do, or whatever. And I was curious to ask, to what extent do you feel that each of us might have chose a task for our lives before we came here? Like there's some kind of intention you set for this experience before you came here, and you're in the process of fulfilling that.
I think obviously this is a hypothesis or theory. Is not a proven thing, but certainly within myself, I know, in a sense, in a deeper way, within myself, I know that I came here to do what I'm doing, but also I came here to do what I earlier did. So it's not that 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 only now I have. Our life is a journey, is a process that allows us to grow in a way that we have, to some extent, that it predetermined, not in very specific terms, but in a general broad sense. We had predetermined to have a particular life, to have certain things that we need to do to know ourselves. Because if to know ourselves is the purpose of one and the purpose of our purpose, then clearly, we are vaster beings than what we are when we are embodied, and we think that we are just the body. When our the tiny little consciousness of the deity that we are, this field, the consciousness of this field that has lived many lives, believes that it is the body, identifies only with the body. Well, then that's a very small part of what we are. So in that case, everything seems silly, that I'm saying, because there is only the body, and, there is only this physical reality, and that's all there is. That's the scientism way of looking at reality. If you stay there is no hope, and everything makes sense, so to speak, because you can explain the little local things that happen. We cannot explain the universe. We cannot explain what happens there. We cannot explain anything that is interiority. And in fact, life is an event that happens by chance. How can life happen by chance? Nobody has even been able to come that close to showing that is true. Life starts with one. That 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 to know itself creates fields that also want to know themselves and interact with each other. Those are the fields. Initially, they're the simple field, the fields of particles that know each other, creates atoms, molecules, blah, 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 blah. And eventually, we are fields of fields of fields of this sophistication that is unbelievable. But, the body, so therefore, is just like an electron is to the field of electrons. That, there are 10 to the 80 or so electrons in the universe, there are excited states of the field at any point in time, but they come and they go, and they go in and out like waves in the sea. And so, but those are not reality. Those are symbols. Those are things that comes and go, just like our body, except that they come and go in a much shorter time, time spans. But the same way. But the reality is actually the interiority, what happens in the interiority, and what happens in the field, the whole thing. But also what happens with the other fields that interact with this field and know each other. So it's a much different view of reality than what we today have with classical physics, and also with quantum physics that is considered just mathematics, is not considered ontological.
For sure, for sure. And you mentioned there that the first half of your life, you've no regrets about that. And it's funny because if you hadn't have done all that work, we wouldn't be sitting having this conversation now via computers. Um, so to wrap up, one last question would be, if your theory of consciousness was the default understanding, and we all had the felt sense that this was how things were, how would that change society? What could society look like if world leaders held this view? If the average person on the street felt themselves to be part wholes as part of a bigger collective, how would that change society?
Well, the fun is very simple. Society, instead of competing and promoting competition, competition being the norm, in fact, the requirement. When you go to school, you must compete. Everything that you do is a competition. The purpose of life, according to scientism, is the survival of the fittest. It used to be the survival of the strongest, but politically correct now is the fittest. But everything is about, with the current worldview, everything is about competition. And what I'm proposing is everything is about cooperation. Cooperation with love. Love is the force that brings into resonance our interiorities if we communicate with love, in cooperation, to know each other, to enjoy each other, to have fun, to create together. And love within ourselves is the taste of the meaning. The taste of the meaning. The more meaning we have within ourselves, the more taste, the more love we feel. So love and light are also very much related. They are the fundamental aspects of one that gave origin to everything. So to me, those are the two principles. And those principles, Christ was saying the same thing. And if you go back to the Vedas, they were saying the same thing. So we have, it's not a novelty. All that I'm saying now is that, look, this stuff, even physics, can be explained if you start this way. And we had to stop talking about the measurement problem in physics that is based by our own misconception of what free will is. We call collapse of the wave function, but in fact it's free will. Look at that. Just change that, and now all of a sudden we become responsible for our own lives. But many people don't want to be responsible. They want to do what they want. That's the issue of the ego. So what are we here to do? Why are we here? Why do we have evil in the world? Okay, it's a long story. Probably another 1 hour will describe that. But in short, evil is the lack of love. Evil is the lack of love. Just like darkness is the lack of light. There is no ontology in evil. The ontology is in the good. But if there is no good, then evil emerges as the lack of good. So if we work together, if we cooperate, and this is not, we have to find the way. We have to, but in order to find the way, we must find the love that is in us. So we must have similar experiences. And so the first step is to the people that are ready to, to open themselves to experiencing their unity with the universe, their unity with one. This is fundamental. So, and everybody can. So this is not a question of faith. It's a question of experiencing, of knowing by experiencing. We know because we experience, not because we trust what somebody else is saying. We have that capacity to know. So.
For sure. Well, what a great note to end on, Federico. Whenever I'm 84, I only can hope that I have as much energy as you do. You're bringing you're bringing an incredible amount of light and love into the world, and I just want to wish you the best on your efforts going forward. For people that want to dive deeper into your work after this, you've got your most recent book is Irreducible. Where would you send people to get a copy of that, and anywhere else you'd send people after this conversation?
Well, yeah. It's the best way is Amazon, but some bookstores may have it too. But it's published by Essentia Foundation, and it is Amazon is the easiest way.
Thank you, Federico. If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy getting our 7 Insights newsletter. This is a once per month email where I share 7 of the most valuable insights I've uncovered in the previous 30 days. It includes book, podcast, and documentary recommendations, as well as questions and quotes specifically curated to help you live a more creative, intentional, and meaningful life. It currently goes out to over 50,000 subscribers each month. And if you're interested in joining them, you can sign up via the link in the description.